everyone.
Hi there, guys.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of.
But you should have.
And now, today, you will.
Oh my God, that was fucking fire right there. I feel
Lit.
Yes.
So let's talk about the Queen of Caucasity of the week.
Of the week. I need to make a jingle or something for a 3-key like piano intro that they do for like morning announcements in high school.
So you might want to introduce some of this because obviously it has...
Well, Amanda brought this to my attention. She's very much in the Twitter world. I very much am not. And she had heard of this. I guess I'll call it controversy now because that's what a lot of people are calling it. A book was written called American Dirt. And it is a story of a migrant woman. And she's basically fleeing to safety in the U.S. She's Mexican, right? Is she Mexican or I think, yeah.
Yeah, she was Mexican.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be this like really harrowing story of this woman crossing the border, which it is a harrowing story. I mean, my own family did it. But this woman is white.
White.
She's white.
Her name is Janine Cummins.
Janine Cummins. And a lot, she got a whole lot of money for this book.
Yeah.
She's on Oprah's book club top of the reading list. She's getting a ton of publicity.
Reese Witherspoon's as well.
Yeah, she actually even had promotion from Salma Hayek.
Yep, and our favorite one who keeps fucking up, Gina Rodriguez.
Salma Hayek actually retracted and she said, I actually didn't know much about this book. I just saw the storyline and I promoted it. So, and you would think though, a kind of story like this would be written by a Latino person, man or woman. So a lot of people are upset because they're like, this is not your story.
Yeah.
This is not your point of view. You've never even been through something like this. And also the book is terrible.
I actually read yet another Twitter review type situation where this guy said that he had been given an ARC of it, which is an advanced reader copy.
Okay.
It's what publishers give to libraries, book reviewers, and now in the age of things like Goodreads and stuff, book influencers, which I hate that word. I wish I could retire that word. But he had been given the ARC and he didn't care for the book in general. But the place he was doing the review for, they only publish positive reviews. So he picked the one thing he thought was positive about it, which was that it was really fast paced. So you could it felt like it would move really quickly.
Okay.
But he said in the promotional materials he received, the publishers had made it sound like she had witnessed this and that her husband had been even closer to the immigrant experience, like to this specific experience.
I heard about that as well.
And he's Irish.
He's Irish.
Like 21st century Irish, though. Not like it happened like in the 19th century. Not that he was even comparable then, but like, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah.
Like they were being purposely misleading, even in the materials that they were sending out.
And that to me is fucking shady.
And what's most upsetting, I think, for me and other writers is that it is very difficult to get published. It takes a long time. It's blood, sweat, and tears. And it's even harder for writers who belong to marginalized groups or are telling marginalized stories. They just don't like the writers who have had experiences like this, who are writing materials like this, got passed up in favor of a white woman. That's the fucking problem.
That's the privilege right
and
there.
For me, the Queen of Caucasity this week is not necessarily the writer, because anybody can write garbage. My problem is the fucking publishers and the companies that went out of their way to sell this fucking shit and passed over Latinx writers who actually had that story to tell and it was real.
So I've actually read some things about people comparing it to Uncle Tom's Cabin and how that book is a classic, but it's seen through a white woman's eyes.
Yeah.
And they're like, but it's such a great book. And it's like we wouldn't have access to classic things like this if you didn't accept that a white woman was writing from this perspective. And it's like, well, why do you need to hear it from, my question is, why do you need to hear it from a white person? Do you feel safe? What's that filter that needs to happen? Why can't you hear it from my own mouth? Or like for people that are actually going through this right now, why can't you hear their stories? When you hear their stories, they're illegal. They're put in cages. They're just a dirty person that's trying to steal my job. But when she writes it, she's a hero.
Well, the problem was even in the story, from what I've read, obviously, there are whole sections of the book where like she's constantly afraid of people that are like, the main character is afraid of people that are her own people. Like it's not a realistic situation.
Yeah. I read a review that Amanda had me read, and it was totally true. This Latina reviewer was saying, why is she so scared of everybody? Like Mexicans aren't scared of other Mexicans. We're not. Or the things that we go through. Like if we would hear of this information of women being raped at the border, we wouldn't be, with stars in our eyes wondering, whoa, that really happens? No, it fucking happens.
Course.
We know that happens. We wouldn't be...
It's a reality that you're already familiar with. You wouldn't, as a character, wouldn't be surprised.
No, not at all.
Like it's not, and I think even if you're not somebody who is Latina, in the case of this situation, you probably also would. I mean,
it's a fact.
I've lived in the world.
Yeah.
Where men rape women everywhere.
Yeah. And she's got there. I heard that there's like this overtone of the book of just this fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole situation is unfortunate and upsetting.
One of the biggest things that upset me was at one of her promotional parties, that centerpiece.
Yes.
So the cover of her book is Mexican tiles, blue and white. And then what separates the tiles to put them into squares is barbed wire.
Yeah, instead of grout.
It's a unique design. I'll give it that credit.
And it would actually be a pretty poetic design if it were coming from a more genuine, authentic place.
But at one of her parties, they did centerpieces where they wrapped up fake walls that were holding flowers and wrapped them in barbed wire. And she was like, look at these cute centerpieces, Bob, on her Instagram. And I was like, bitch, you've obviously never had to hop barbed wire or get stuck in it.
Yeah, the caucasity of that.
Yes, was disgusting.
That was really upsetting.
Did you see she removed that from her Instagram?
Oh, yeah. But people screenshotted the shit out of that.
It's there. She can't just erase it.
I don't think I'll ever quite wrap my brain around the need to tell someone else's story.
I was going to ask you that.
I guess that's hard for me to say because I am a fiction writer and I do write stories. And my novel that I'm working on, that I'm on draft number 2 on, does center around a story that was similar to something that happened to somebody I grew up with. But it's more of a universal story. It's all about this girl who was driving her little sister and they got into a car accident and the little sister dies. That it doesn't have anything to do with culture. You know what I mean?
Or
like
identity.
It's not like it's not like it's the thing that makes you who you are. I mean, I would say my character would argue that it is the thing that makes her who she is, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's not the thing that defines her identity from the outside and from the inside. You know, it's not like when you're, obviously I don't know personally, but if you're a person of color, like people notice that you are. Like it's not like something you can just take off at the end of the evening.
No.
So I think that's the fucking problem, is like, I'm not trying to tell someone's story and steal their voice from them. I'm telling a story about the human condition that happens to be a situation that many people have been in.
She even wrote a preface in her book, which I read, about how she was like, I know that she acknowledged that she knew this book might cause controversy, but she said, I wish someone with darker skin could have written this story.
Oh, well, they could have.
And
Probably
they have.
did.
And I just felt like she's putting herself up on this pedestal of being, it's that freaking white savior shit.
Yeah.
I told my husband about it, and I didn't tell him at first that she was white. And then I told him at the very end of describing the story, and he like turned and he looked at me. And this is while we were having a day date, by the way. We were eating tacos in the car waiting to pick our son up. And he like looked at me and he was, what? And so I was like, okay. And I was like, I saw that reaction. Why do you feel that way? And he said the same thing. He's like, we don't need you to tell our story. We've been doing it for a long time in our music and our food and our art and our writing. We're just not being
heard.
We're
not being elevated.
Yeah.
Like
he actually started writing a song about this subject.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
I think if we're going to see anything positive come from this situation, I think it did put a glaring spotlight on how unequal and the publishing industry is.
Very.
And, the kind of lengths that they would go to for this. I mean, they were living or dying on this fucking book. Mm-hmm. They put so much money into its promotion.
She got 7 figures.
My friend has his short story collection coming out through university in the next couple of months. And he basically had to do all of his own work for him. Like they were kind of useless. And now he's been given $1,000 to do promotion. That's his whole budget.
That's it?
$1,000.
That's crazy.
Yep.
I did hear too that all of her book ratings have been canceled.
Including here.
And here she was being threatened, which I don't agree with. I don't think people should threaten her with violence. Because that's right. That's scary. I don't. Mm-hmm. And she's a mom. She's got kids. I would be scared. I personally would not want to attack her in that way. I think a forum should be held, and people should be allowed to discuss with her why this is irritating and why this is not okay.
I kind of hope she just disappears. I hope the book goes away. I hope her career's. I don't want to wish ill on someone's career because I wouldn't want that for myself, but. I mean, I think her career is probably ruined anyway.
Yeah,
however,
another publisher's
that James Fry guy, do you remember that guy who wrote that A Million Little Pieces and it was all a fucking lie? It was actually fiction. He wrote it as a memoir, said it was real. And now that's a TV show.
True.
He was like blacklisted for, I don't even know, a decade probably. And now here he's got a goddamn TV show out of that book. Like, you're kidding me.
Well, her book was being shopped around for a movie. So
I mean, white people happen to fail up a lot. Mm-hmm. It's upsetting because I think it still only happens to certain kinds of white people. Mm-hmm. The kinds who already had a little bit of a leg up anyway. And that it just is, it's difficult to stomach and swallow. And I think you have a special, unique problem with it. And I do too, in a different way.
Yeah. I did have kind of a personal struggle with it because I do have a friend that is white and she's writing a book and it's has a Latina main character. And so I was like, I don't know how to voice this or I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And Nick told me, well, it's like, you do have a voice, so maybe you need to say something.
I would ask her, my question would be, who are your sensitivity readers?
What do you mean by a sensitivity reader?
That's what everybody, like, basically, if you're a decent ass writer who has a character that is something other than who you are, mm-hmm. you give it to people who represent those identities and have them read it and come back with you with feedback that's like, hey, this is a problem. This is an issue here. And also, if you're going to hire a sensitivity reader, you fucking pay them.
Yeah.
Because that's work.
Yeah.
So that's what you should ask. Who are your sensitivity readers going to be? I'd volunteer.
Can I read it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, truly, I was talking in your voice. I wouldn't personally volunteer. Obviously, I'm saying, like, if I were you, I would say, who are they? If you don't have one, I'll volunteer for it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Here's my rate. Get that money.
Alrighty. Should we get this show on the road?
Yeah, I want to hear about your lady.
Okay. I have a feeling she might know. I don't know. We always do this. Edmonia Lewis.
I don't know her.
Yes.
Yay!
She's a sculptor, and she is the first woman of African American and Native American descent to achieve international success and recognition.
As a sculptor?
Yes.
Ooh, that's exciting.
So Edmonia's birth name was Wildfire, which I love. So her timeline of her birth is a little foggy. So throughout her life, when she was older, she claimed to be born in different years in different places. She was a little
cagey.
A little cagey in that. She was really elusive about why would you do that? I don't know. I don't know her story all the way. I don't know why she would do that.
Remember the motorcycle queen?
She did that too.
Yeah.
I guess make your own story.
She just wanted her own legend.
So even though she was elusive about it, it's estimated that she was born in upstate New York in either 1843 or 1845. Her father was a free African American, and her mother was a Chippewa Native American. She had one older brother named Sunrise, and both their parents died just before Edmonia was 5 years old.
Oh, that's rough.
Very. They were adopted by two of their aunts. I believe it was on her mother's side. And they went to live with her mother's nomadic tribe. And so while living with her aunts, Edmonia helped support her family by making and selling baskets, moccasins, and embroidered blouses. They had moved towards the Niagara Falls area, so there was a lot of tourists and stuff. So they were able to do a lot of selling there. When Edmonia was 12, Sunrise decided that they were going to leave the Chippewas and move to California because he wanted to get in the gold mining business. And he heard it was really good money. So he actually made a pretty decent living, which was really surprising. He was able to pay for her early schooling, and he was able to help her attend the Oberlin College in Ohio in 1859. So while at Oberlin, she decided to shed her Chippewa name, which I think we've discussed before. A lot of people do.
Yeah, assimilate.
And so she started going by Mary Edmonia Lewis, but mainly by Edmonia.
I wonder where she came up with Edmonia, because that's a pretty unique name. I wonder if that was a family
somebody in
name?
her family.
Is it a character in some
in
great story that I want to read?
She actually did really well as a student, and she emerged very early as a really talented artist. Oberlin, the student population there was over 1,000. She was one of 30 students of color. Can you imagine that ratio?
That's actually not too bad when you think about 30 out of 1,000 versus 30 out of 20,000.
True.
Which is what I would have been afraid of.
I'd feel pretty thin. I'd be like, we got to stick together, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way probably every person of color feels in Spokane.
Yeah.
I mean, especially Black people. It's real white here.
It is very, very, very. So even though Oberlin was a progressive school and it accepted Black women in a co-educational environment, Edmonia said that she was subject to racism and discrimination every day. She and other female students were rarely given the opportunity to participate in the classroom or even speak at public forums that they would hold for the classes. Her school life at Oberlin came to a violent halt.
Oh, God.
Yes. She was accused of poisoning two of her roommates. Yes.
What?
So the story is that they were going to go out on a sleigh ride. So the girls came over, or they were in their room, and she served them spiced wine, and they all had the spiced wine. And then they went on the sleigh ride, and the two girls got really, really sick. So they went to the doctor, and they were heard that Edmonia had served them the spiced wine. And so they just automatically assumed that she put something in the wine.
They didn't do any testing?
They did some testing, and they didn't find anything. So, but it had to be her. It had to be her doing something wrong.
Well, my true crime brain is did she?
Ooh.
And then like the other side of me is like, they're always going to blame them.
Yeah, right.
I don't know which one is correct, but
Who knows?
I mean, maybe they had it coming. Who knows?
Who knows? But once word got out around town, the people, so the college was progressive, the town really wasn't. And so
what part of Ohio is Oberlin in? I don't know.
I'm not really sure, actually. I didn't look that up. The town became really furious with her and things started to get really heightened. So one day when she was walking home alone, there was a mob of white vigilantes.
Oh.
They dragged her into a field and they beat her severely. And then they left her there.
Holy shit.
I don't know how she was able to get home, if somebody found her and was able to help her. I couldn't find anything from that, but she was beaten pretty severely. So while she was recovering, they arrested her and charged her with poisoning the two girls. She had to endure a highly publicized trial. And at the end, there was no proof of wrongdoing. There was no proof of any poison, and she was acquitted.
Oh, good.
Yes.
At least the justice system worked. P.S. Oberlin College is in Oberlin.
Oberlin, Ohio?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I feel real dumb right now.
I didn't even know there was an Oberlin in
I
Ohio.
didn't either. I knew Oberlin College existed.
Well, after suffering that ordeal, she then was accused of stealing art supplies. She was accused of stealing paint, of brushes, and a canvas. And there was no proof that she stole these things, but the school still had a bad taste in their mouth and they kicked her out and did not allow her to graduate. I feel some overwhelming, you don't belong here.
Oh, there was definitely somebody who was like, she should have gotten in trouble for this and I'm pissed she didn't, so I'm going to do this thing and frame her for it.
Yeah.
It screams of that.
Yeah. She left Oberlin in 1863. With her brother's encouragement and financial assistance, she ended up moving to Boston. So there she befriended an abolitionist named William Lloyd Garrison and a portrait sculptor named Edward Brackett. So sharing her love of art with Edward, he took her under his wing and he directed and taught her sculptural studies. And she fell in love with sculpture. She was determined to become a sculptor. And she had minimal training, minimal experience, but she started producing like her own clay and plaster medallions of portraits of well-known abolitionists. So she sculpted her friend, William Lloyd Garrison. She sculpted Charles Sumner and Wendell Phillips. And so they're like those side profiles. It kind of looks like a coin, but a little bit bigger. And she would sculpt these out of clay and then she would sell them to people.
They sound like, what are those necklaces? Oh, fuck. I used to love them when I was a kid.
What necklaces?
They're like oval and it's a black background and then like an ivory.
Ivory. Yeah. I totally know what you're talking about.
What are those called?
I don't know.
I know exactly what they're called, but it's just not coming to me. Cameos.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
That's what that sounds like.
Yeah.
Sounds like she was
it
making
did look like that.
cameos.
So in 1864, she created a bust of Colonel Robert Shaw. He was a Civil War hero who had died leading an all-black 54th Massachusetts regiment. And this was her most famous work to date. And the money she earned from this and all the sales of the copies they did of the bust gave her enough money to go to Rome because she wanted to further study over there.
Yeah, I guess if you're going to study sculpture, then Europe is where it's at.
Could you imagine that? Being able to like finance a trip and go to Europe? On your art?
Literally never been to Europe. So no, I can't imagine it.
So she traveled through London, Paris, and Florence, and she settled in Rome. She rented a studio near the Piazza Barberini. I think I'm saying that right. Barberini.
Well, it's no lion.
Leon. So over the next 2 years, she actually learned Italian like super fast. She picked up on it really quick. So not only does she know Chippewa and English, she now knows Italian. And she started hanging out with some fancy folks over there in Rome. She was hanging out with other sculptors and people who had enough money to do commissions for artwork. So I'm going to show Amanda a quick clip so just so she can take a peek at some of the artwork that she had done.
I was practically driven to Rome. In order to obtain the opportunities for arts culture and to find a social atmosphere where I was not constantly reminded of my color, the land of liberty had no room for a colored sculptor.
So the clip I just had Amanda listen to showed some pieces of hers, but also her appreciation for going somewhere where she felt her skin color didn't matter and wasn't going to get in her way, which I thought was pretty nice.
Her sculptures are very classical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't know what I was expecting, but I didn't quite expect it to be very classical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you think in your mind of like the statue of David,
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of sculpture she was doing. And I guess I thought she was going to be doing something different, partially because she's American. And I just associate.
that she was so classical.
Yeah, she was doing these like classical European old world sculpture techniques. They're very beautiful though, and very detailed. Like that drapery is, I'm always really fascinated by people who can take something solid and hard like stone or whatever and make it look soft and flowy. Like that's such talent.
The time, the effort, the patience.
Yeah, the skill too.
Yes. So at this time, there was a huge availability of fine white marble, which the statues that you just saw are of that really milky, soft-looking white marble. And a lot of sculptors at this time would create a plaster model, and then they would hire stonecutters to turn it into a finished marble product. I didn't know a lot of people used to do that.
So they didn't do it themselves?
They would create the cast, but then someone else would cut it for them.
Yeah, but like that's the hard part.
That's the hard part. Exactly.
It's like what we just said about taking something hard and turning it into something that's smooth and soft. Like that's the fucking hard part. You just paid someone else to do the hard part for you and then called it yours? I don't think that feels good.
It sounds like that book.
It does. It does feel like that book.
So Edmonia stood out among the other sculptors of her generation because she rarely employed workmen. She completed most of her work without any assistance. She said she was afraid that if she accepted any help, it would open the door to people looking down on her work and disputing her originality.
I was going to say, like, that's the fastest way for somebody to discount your ability.
Yes. Which is smart of her.
Yeah, smart
of her. And
actually,
it happened quite frequently because already she's a female sculptor.
Yeah, that's already a mark against her, and then to be a woman of color.
And she was hanging out with other women who were sculptors too, and a lot of those women did the same thing. They didn't accept any help because they already had almost like a mark against them. So as she began sculpting in marble, she worked within the neoclassical manner, which we mentioned. She focused on naturalism. Many of her later work, she started focusing on themes and images relating to African and Native American people. One of her most famous works was called Forever Free. It depicts the image of an African American man and a woman emerging from the bonds of slavery. So the statue is the man. He's got just like this really powerful looking body, and he's got a chain in his hand, but the chain is not around his wrist. And the ball, he's actually got a foot on top of it. And he's like cool. Looking up at the sky, and he's holding the chain up in the air. And he's got this woman with him that's like putting her hands together almost like as if she's like in thanks, like when they're both looking up in the same direction to the sky. It's a really beautiful statue.
I'm sure it's powerful.
Another sculpture that she created was called the Arrow Maker, which showed a Native American father teaching his daughter how to make an arrow. And that too had a lot of like free-flowing fabrics and things like that. And also that she was having an image of a father teaching a daughter.
Yeah, I love that. That's, I mean, even right now is pretty revolutionary to see. It made me actually think about Hair Love, which was a children's book that's been turned into a little short, and it's nominated for an Oscar. Yeah. And it's about a father doing a daughter's hair. I think it shouldn't necessarily be revolutionary, but it still is to have this like way of showing fatherly love that is to a daughter. It's great.
It is great. So her work was praised and sold for large sums of money. She got paid.
Good.
Which I also enjoy because a lot of our women do not.
It's true. Anna May Wong, man.
Yes.
That was a rough story.
That was a rough story. In 1873, an article that was written in the New Orleans Picayune started.
The Picayune, yeah.
Picayune? Do you know what that is? Okay.
Yeah.
Picayune.
It's just a newspaper, but yeah, it's very famous.
They stated that Edmonia Lewis had snared two $58,000 commissions.
What is that in today money?
Oh my gosh.
You know what? If Lucas were here, he would tell us, because you know what he did?
What did he do? Did he give us a ratio?
He did for Anna May Wong's first movie. He texted me while he was editing it, and you know, it was the one where I said it made like, I don't even know, like $2 million.
Oh yeah.
He said $2 million in 1924 is $304 million in 2019.
Oh, so hers is in 1873.
Yeah, let's look it up. He gave me a website. I can't find it. Anyway, Lucas would tell us, was $50,000 and it was what year?
In 1873.
I mean, it's probably like 400 million then.
Her newfound popularity too made her studio like a tourist destination. So she'd like invite people into her studio, and people would look at the works that she was working on or the works that she had already completed. And she was doing a lot of exhibitions.
You did it.
I did it. She did one in Chicago, she did one in Illinois, and then she did a couple in Rome, which is pretty impressive. And in the Rome one was in 1871. Could you imagine showing your work in Rome, Italy in 1871?
In the 19th century?
28 years old at this time.
Whoa, she did a lot already.
Yeah.
I mean, she already beat a murder charge.
She stayed humble, though. Here's what she said about all the praise she was in the midst of all the praise that she was receiving. She says, "I know praise is not good for me. Some praise me because I'm a colored girl, and I don't want that kind of praise. I would rather you point out my defects, for that will teach me something." She's like, don't kiss my ass.
Yeah. Well, and I like that praise my defects, like, or tell me my defects is like, there's that thing that I know you've seen happen before, especially when white people are like praising the work of someone of color, where they're like, oh my God, they're so amazing. It's so wonderful. Like everything they do is wonderful and amazing. And it's just like, it's almost like the opposite. It's like it's over the top. It's like you don't give that person any room to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Or help them get better.
Yeah. For sure.
I mean, people run into that situation all the time where they see something and like, I didn't want to say anything because we're friends. And I'm like, say it because we're friends. In 1876, there was a centennial exposition in Philadelphia. And she created this monumental 3,000-pound marble sculpture, and it caused a little bit of controversy.
Ooh, I like some controversy.
The piece was titled "The Death of Cleopatra." And it portrayed the queen sitting in her throne, and she's like in the throes of death. Like the way that the body's positioned, she's like a little disheveled. Her robe is a little messed up. She's kind of slumped to the right in her throne, and her head is kind of looking up towards the light. She's got the asp in her hand because the death of Cleopatra was that she poisoned herself by the bite of a snake. But her face is almost like a face of pleasure. And like her dress is slipped down and like one of her breasts is exposed.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's like this almost like, it's really intimate. It's really erotic. I like it.
Sounds a little erotic.
So people see this statue, and a lot of people, like some writers for papers, are like, it's a very striking statue. They were impressed with it. They thought it was good work. But a lot of people who were coming in to view it were like a little scandalized by it because it was so, I guess, fierce in the sexuality of it.
Well, and this is Puritan America at that point. You said it's in
Yes.
Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
Heart of the Puritans at that point. Where like women couldn't even have anything but a turtleneck and a full sleeved dress on.
3 turtlenecks on.
You know?
And then people were even more scandalized when they figured out a woman had sculpted it.
A woman of color.
A woman
at
of
that.
color. It just kept like getting worse for them. They like all the pearls were being clutched.
I have this like image in my head of like one of those movies where they're like
And then they pass out.
Yeah, and then they fucking fall down from fright.
So the statue was actually placed in storage, and then it was moved to the 1878 Chicago Interstate Exposition, where it remained unsold. So the statue actually it has this crazy story. So it was picked up by a man who like owned a racetrack. He put it at his racetrack. It sat there for like 50, 60 years. He died. The property was bought by the Postal Service. So the Postal Service took it. They put it over in some other little random place. Someone stole it.
It's 3,000 pounds. How do you steal it?
That? Well, someone like took it, and then it was in another area, and some people had like defaced it, and then it was moved to another area. So it wasn't until 1999 that the statue was refound because this woman was doing research on Edmonia and she wanted to find the statue. They found it. The person that had it actually donated it to the Smithsonian. So
that's good.
It took about $30,000 to restore because I think her nose was chipped off. Some of her feet were chipped off, and they call it sanding, where like it deteriorates a little bit. They restored it. You can see it at the Smithsonian now.
Well, now I need to make... Is it in DC?
I'm not sure about which one.
Yeah. That would be cool to see.
But crazy that statue bounced around so much.
Yeah. And also the fact that someone just had it.
Yeah.
How do you have a 3,000-pound sculpture?
I don't.
Just lying around like, I think I got one of those in my backyard.
Well, it switched hands so many times. I was like, I'm not going to write this out. It was weird. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. In 1887, she actually was commissioned to do a portrait of U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is a pretty fucking big deal. In the late 1880s, the neoclassicism style started declining, and so did her popularity. And she continued sculpting in marble. She was creating a lot of altarpieces and other works for Roman Catholic churches because actually she was a very devout Roman Catholic.
Oh, interesting.
In the art world, she became lost. And by 1901, she left Rome and she moved to London. The events later in her life were a little unknown. Edmonia never married. She didn't have any children. And this was actually some interesting information I stumbled upon. Her brother, Sunrise, who actually adapted the name Samuel, he prospered very, very much. He became a barber, and he eventually settled in the city of Bozeman, Montana. Yeah.
Oh, what? Wait, okay, keep going.
And he set up a barber shop on Main Street. He invested in commercial real estate, and he built his own home, which still stands at 308 South Bozeman Avenue.
What was his last name?
Samuel Lewis.
Wow.
And
I love that tie-in to my own life. Now I have to go see that house.
And it was actually placed in 2000. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And Sunrise is actually buried in Sunset Hills Cemetery in Bozeman.
I've been there.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that Sunrise is buried in Sunset.
That's actually really cool.
So much like her childhood, her foggy beginning years, her final years are just kind of shrouded in mystery. Until the 1890s, she continued to exhibit her work, and she even visited Frederick Douglass in Rome.
Wow.
Little known is about the last couple years of her life. Recently, I think it was in 2017, they discovered her death documents. And it did say that she did pass away in London, England in 1907. And she died of some kind of respiratory ailment.
Yeah, probably pneumonia.
Her work still receives acclaim, and her surviving pieces are now of permanent collections at Howard University and at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And so I got most of my information actually from the Smithsonian website.
Nice.
An article from the Smithsonian Magazine by Alice George. And the clip and information was provided by Earth, Dot, and Sky and Wikipedia. Wikipedia actually had fantastic information for once.
I didn't use Wikipedia at all for mine today.
Nice. Well, that is my lady.
Well, that was a great story. Thank you for telling it. You did a great job.
Awesome.
And I have never heard of her before, and I'm really excited I now know who she is.
Neither had I.
You absolutely have to, when you're posting the Instagram post this week, make sure you include the picture of the Cleopatra statue. I have to see it.
I will.
And I'm sure everybody listening to this feels the same way.
Yes.
Now they have to see it.
It's a gorgeous statue. It's huge.
3,000 pounds.
3,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Who do you have?
I have today the story of Mathilde Krim.
That name sounds familiar.
Probably, although I didn't know her.
All right.
She was a medical researcher who dedicated her life and work to understanding and combating AIDS.
No, I don't know her.
Mathilde Krim was born on July 9th, 1926, to Elizabeth Rose Krauss and Eugene Emmanuel Galland in Como, Italy. Beautiful. She was the oldest of 4 children. Her father was actually both Swiss and Italian, Protestant and Catholic, like his parents had been one of each. And her mother was born an Austrian Catholic, but grew up in Czechoslovakia.
Oh my gosh.
So this is all to say that Matilda was immediately exposed to lots of languages, religions, cultures, and experiences. And you mentioned that your girl talked spoke 3 languages. Mm-hmm. She had 5 or 6.
Whoa.
She did French, German, Italian, English, Hebrew, and Swiss. I don't know.
Wow.
Something.
Could you imagine?
I mean, the world is your oyster, right?
Yeah.
When she was 6 years old, the family left Italy after Mussolini took over the country. Her father got a job in Geneva, Switzerland, and that's where the family moved. And of course, Switzerland remained neutral. Even though he had a PhD in agronomy, which is the study of soil and stuff, and that was what he wanted to do, he had to take basically whatever he could get. And he ended up working as a public health officer instead. In neutral Switzerland, Matilda lived a relatively comfortable life. She was extremely intelligent and very thoughtful, always asking questions. After secondary school, she enrolled at the University of Geneva to study biology, which was a highly unusual path for a young woman in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And her parents were not happy.
Really?
And I thought that was really interesting that they were just like, no, you should do something women do. But she proved her worth almost immediately. She drew the attention of Dr. Emile Goyenot. That's my best guess. He was a professor and an embryologist studying embryos.
Yeah.
Who noticed her skill and invited her to become an assistant in his lab. While going to school, Matilda also got a job as a part-time clerk in the office of a Jewish lawyer. And she was often tasked with ferrying papers around to government offices. And she started to notice that there was an alarming number of Jewish people trying to get Swiss visas.
Okay.
And she was like, what's this all about?
Yeah.
Because she just didn't really know exactly. And in the spring of 1945, she was 18 years old when she went to see a movie. And before the movie, they would often show newsreels. And at this particular movie, they showed a newsreel of the liberation of a Nazi death camp. Ooh. And she was like, holy shit. And it totally changed her life. She determined from that moment on that she was going to help people, and she would do anything she could to combat discrimination and prejudice whenever and wherever she could. And her parents, so she had started to already become friends with Jewish people, and her parents were pretty disapproving of that. They weren't exactly pro-Nazi, but they thought that
just stay out of the fray.
There was that, and also they thought that the Axis powers were they've got some crazy methods, but they're out for the better good.
Oh God.
Yeah. So I don't think she was terribly close to her parents after a while. As she continued her scientific studies, she got a Bachelor of Science degree in 1948, and she started working alongside some Jewish students at the medical school and became friends with them. And she also started taking courses in the history of Judaism, and then went a step further after meeting David Dannon, a Jewish medical student who was part of a resistance group. She converted to Judaism.
Really?
and then spent a
Wow.
summer smuggling guns across the French-Swiss border to help Jewish resistance fighters.
Oh my gosh.
And then she married David.
I felt like it was going that way.
Yeah. Mathilde gave birth to their daughter named Daphne, which I think is a beautiful name, in 1951. And she continued doing her work in education. After her bachelor's, she stayed on at the University of Geneva to pursue a PhD. And she was doing that while caring for her baby.
Jeez.
When Daphne was 18 months old, the family moved to Israel, where Mathilde continued her work on her degree at the newly founded Weizmann Institute, which is a very famous institute of medical research. And she started out there as a research assistant. This is shocking to me, but at the time she was able to care for Daphne and work at the institute because they had a child care center for their employees.
And what year is this?
1951.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. In 1953, she got her PhD from the University of Geneva in genetics. She's just astounding to me. And she was then promoted to junior scientist at the Weizmann Institute and eventually was a research associate. While her professional career was really taking off, she's rising higher and higher and higher, and they're recognizing her work. Her marriage was not. Within a year of arriving in Israel, Mathilde and Daphne were living alone in a small apartment on the grounds of the Weizmann Institute. And the couple divorced shortly after. But she didn't let that get in her way.
I was going to say, it doesn't always work out, especially when you got goals.
Yes. She published her first scientific paper in 1950, and she detailed the first electron micrographic images of a chromosome.
Oh, that's awesome.
Her most famous and arguably most important paper came in 1956 in the journal Science, where she and her colleagues had discovered the ability to tell the sex of a baby before birth by extracting cells from amniotic fluid, a technique now known as amniocentesis.
Yeah, that's still used today.
Yes, which is still now used to help diagnose diseases or life-threatening issues in fetuses prior to birth.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that.
That's awesome.
In 1959, Dr. Krim and her main collaborator, Dr. Leo Sachs, developed a technique to study tumor viruses inside mammals. She also began studying the relationship between viruses and cancer in mammals, and the transmission between mammals and from mother to infant, and from infant to fellow litter mates.
Wow.
While working at the Weizmann Institute, she met a trustee of the institute named Arthur Krim, and he was a very wealthy American lawyer, and the two fell in love and married in 1958. But he lived in the United States, she lived in Israel, and they tried to make a long-distance marriage work, but it was extremely difficult.
That'd be hard.
So he convinced her to move to New York City. Arthur was really supportive, actually, of Mathilde's career. And she actually said, though, she wouldn't have had it any other way. She told him it was a condition of their marriage that she be allowed to continue her work.
There you go.
Later, I was reading this New York Times article that was written, I believe, in 1990. And she said that it was much harder for a woman to be career-minded than a man. She said, I think I probably could have done more if I had had a husband who was less involved in things. Research is such a competitive life, and most of my colleagues are men who have wives who do everything at home. And obviously I knew that, but I hadn't really thought about that he's supportive, but is he making her dinner every night? Is he packing her lunches for her? Is he setting out her dresses? Mm-hmm. Is he making sure that all the bills are paid?
Is he doing the laundry?
Is he doing the laundry? Is he cleaning the house? Probably not.
No.
And that's the kind of stuff that wives do, especially at this time, to support their husbands who are very career-minded. Her new husband wasn't just a successful lawyer. He was a very prominent man who had crossed over from law to politics to entertainment.
Oh, that's an interesting cross.
Yes, he became a film producer and eventually was the head of United Artists, which was a very famous film production company that's still in existence. Under his watch, they produced such films as Moulin Rouge and 12 Angry Men.
Oh, wow.
He also served as the finance chair for the Democratic Party and counted John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson among his friends.
Okay.
He knew everyone. He rubbed elbows with everyone who was powerful and famous. And those connections would later prove to be very vital in Mathilde's work in addressing AIDS.
Mm.
Within a few months of arriving in New York, Mathilde joined a research team at the Cornell Medical College and then eventually joined the team at Sloan Kettering Institute for Cancer Research in 1962, which continues to be today like the leading cancer institute. Dr. Krim became increasingly interested in studying interferons. I had to look this up.
Okay.
Interferons are natural animal proteins that are released when a virus is introduced.
Okay.
She was convinced that interferons had the potential to treat or cure cancer. So she spends a lot of time really doing this research and really studying this. In 1983, while at Sloan Kettering, she's asked to take a look at a rare form of skin cancer that was affecting some of their patients. The patients also presented with a new immunological disease that was popping up all over the city, particularly among gay men and drug users. So they immediately started looking at this, and there was actually this really interesting article I read where there was another doctor working with her side by side, and they were like, holy shit. You don't get very many opportunities in your life to discover a new disease and be on the ground floor of figuring out what the fuck is happening. And so they were, in some ways, pretty excited about like, oh my God, there's this opportunity to like really study this thing.
Yeah.
But as soon as the people who were getting sick were identified as these, to the wider public, moral aberrations, then the interest in studying it and finding cures for it just disappeared.
And that just fucks over everybody, not just that demographic.
And according to the National Institutes of Health, by the end of 1983, which was really the year that they discovered it, 4,661 AIDS cases were found, and 2,085 AIDS-related deaths had been recorded in the U.S. So that first year, it had killed over 2,000 people.
Jeez.
Dr. Krim was alarmed by what she was seeing. She knew that this had the potential of being a widespread epidemic because she was seeing how quickly and how easily it was being passed between people. And also she believed that it would come to affect everyone. She was like, it may not be right now, but it will. And we've got to figure out what's happening now. Her counterparts did not see it that way. That's not the way the government saw it. No one else was on her side. The government wasn't funding it enough, and in some ways, not at all. And so there was no real research being done. So she decided, fuck it, I'll do it myself. And she was lucky enough to be married to a man who was very wealthy. So in 1985, she borrowed $100,000 from him.
Oh my gosh.
And she founded the AIDS Medical Foundation, which was the first private organization to fund research on AIDS.
She founded that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
President Reagan at the time wouldn't even acknowledge AIDS for another 2 years that it even existed. And it was 4 more years before he would even mention it in a speech.
Jeez.
By the time he did mention it, thousands and thousands and thousands of people had died or been infected. So Dr. Krim was uniquely positioned to lead the charge. Because she was a white, heterosexual woman, she was taken a little more seriously because she didn't have anything at stake, seemingly.
Okay.
She's a married, white, heterosexual woman, and the majority of people getting sick were gay men and drug users, and many of them were people of color. And so even her friends at the time didn't see why she would care.
Wow. Like, it's not you. It's not happening to you. So why should you care?
And she said that at the time, she had some friends who even implied that they deserved it because of their lifestyles.
Wow.
Which we've heard before. We know that that was happening.
Yeah.
But she was really offended and upset by that because to her, it recalled that image of that newsreel and of the emaciated bodies and the dead people at these Nazi death camps where people were just being killed or let to suffer and die because they were seemingly perceived as different.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, no.
Can't let this happen again.
You can't do this.
Yeah. Good on her.
She also had the benefit of being a very well-educated, highly skilled scientist. And she was able to break down the complexities of the disease for people who didn't possess her same education. And most crucially, she was very well connected, right? So she was able to get money and people to give a shit. There was a tremendous amount of misinformation, obviously, at the time, and a lot of fear-mongering about AIDS. And it really hampered her ability to find funding for research. So she really felt obligated to educate people about it, about how do you get it and who gets it and why they get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little clip I want to show you, and this is her in 2009 talking about what she did then to try to get especially politicians to listen to her.
Oh.
I did a lot of lobbying in the early years of the epidemic, going from one office to the other on Capitol Hill, and also in certain states, visiting with the state governments. And what amazed me is that the people high placed in government knew not more and sometimes less than the people at the bottom. Important new strategies must start at the grassroots level and trickle up.
She can be a little bit, I think, hard to understand.
Her accent, yeah.
Yeah. So what she was saying there is that she would lobby and go door to door to door, individually talking to these politicians and sometimes state politicians to try to get them to understand what was happening. And at the end there, she's talking about how you have to have grassroots movements because that's how information trickles up, which I thought was a cool metaphor.
Yeah, brilliant.
A similarly minded organization to hers started about the same time in California, and they reached out and the two of them decided to merge. They had the same goals in mind, which was let's fund and figure out what the fuck is going on with AIDS. One of the biggest names behind the California group was Elizabeth Taylor.
Really?
Yeah.
One of the biggest stars in the world.
And she also saw the need to address the epidemic of AIDS. And this is what she literally said. I was made aware of this huge, loud silence regarding AIDS that I finally thought to myself, bitch, do something yourself.
Wow.
Together, Dr. Krim and Elizabeth Taylor merged their groups and along with other scientists and activists, created the American Foundation for AIDS Research, or AMFAR, which to this day is still a very important organization that is funding AIDS research all over the world. Elizabeth Taylor was one of its founding members, as was Dr. Krim, and Dr. Krim was the founding co-chair and chair of the board.
Wow.
This is what Mathilde told the New York Times in 1984 on a profile of her push to help build a facility to help AIDS patients. So basically, the New York Times was covering this big gala she was helping to organize where all of these famous people and all of these politicians were going to be there. And it was all about funding the building of a facility.
Oh, okay.
And this is what she said. I volunteered for the foundation because I was incensed. So many young men were dying, mostly intelligent and sophisticated young men, some of the city's best products. And many would be dying abandoned or alone because they were afraid to contact their families. I want to put a little caveat on that. I thought, okay, it's true that there were many intelligent and sophisticated people, but I think it doesn't matter if you weren't those things either. You deserve to have your death remembered and understood.
Yeah.
She was raising money for this facility, and her facility was supposed to be different from what had been previously been going on in AIDS. At the time, the hospitals were overrun with patients who had advanced stages of AIDS. And the hospitals were not taking on patients who were just starting to see signs and symptoms or just becoming diagnosed with HIV. Okay. They were like, no, come back to us when you're dying.
So when your body parts are literally falling off.
Yes. So that was one of the reasons why she wanted to open up a clinic, was because she wanted to start a clinic that was specifically for people who were newly diagnosed. Another reason, this is what she said, another reason we need such a clinic is because it's a place where patients can come without fear of discrimination. We deal with a population afraid of discriminatory practices, and that is not only gay men, but drug users as well. 1984.
Yikes.
This is what she's saying. I mean, that's pretty powerful.
It is. And pretty, honestly, it's straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Very.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was like, she's really putting it out there immediately. Like, this is discriminatory. You can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Mathilde also approached AIDS from a scientist's perspective and encouraged others to do so as well. She wanted people to stop moralizing and therefore marginalizing people with AIDS.
Yes.
So this is her talking specifically about the stigma of gay sex.
People acquire self-motivation by knowing, Then education for safer sex makes sense.
That's right. That's
And
right.
I think one of the big mistakes our society has made is to make moralistic judgments about natural events.
Right.
Natural events should be looked with what we know about nature and a rational system to analyze the events.
I loved that she's out here way back in the 80s talking about gay sex is natural. It's just a natural thing. It's part of nature. That was a pretty revolutionary idea to say.
Yeah. Even for back then.
Yeah,
And
especially.
just in the 80s. Yeah.
I think it's important to also note, we've talked about how sometimes we get really stuck when we're talking about these women who've done great things. We only recognize the greatness.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes have a tendency to overlook the complicated parts. So I do want to include a couple of things. One is that she was a big proponent of Israel
Okay.
and would fund a lot of Israeli stuff, which that's a controversial topic. But there's no doubt that that is potentially a complicating factor about her. Also, she didn't always make the right moves, even in the AIDS world. In 1990, the mayor of New York was David Dinkins at the time, and he was naming a new health commissioner. And Dr. Krim served on his advising committee, and basically whatever she said he should do, that's what he was going to do.
Really?
And he was like, well, pick your guy. So she recommended a man named Dr. Woodrow A. Myers Jr., who had previously served as the Indiana health commissioner. It became public knowledge quickly, especially among the gay community and the AIDS community, that Dr. Myers, when he was in Indiana, had advocated for and actually instituted recording the names of people with AIDS.
No.
So there's like a permanent record of them. These are the people with AIDS.
Jeez.
Which obviously stigmatizes and potentially provides paths of discrimination towards AIDS patients.
Well, you can look at this list, like, say you're looking for a job.
Mm-hmm.
Say you're trying to get into a relationship. Say anything. Someone might just target you because you have AIDS.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's the person that she recommended become the new health commissioner for the city of New York.
Okay.
And the mayor, the controversy was obviously they were in an uproar, and it was very, very public, and it became a pretty big fight.
Did she defend it?
Yeah, she was like, I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he was just following what the traditional path is when you have an epidemic.
Okay.
And we're in the middle of an epidemic right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, are they recording the names of people with coronavirus? Because I feel like that's a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's not true. I hope that's not standard practice for an epidemic.
Yeah.
But it might be. I don't know enough about it to say definitively that it is or it isn't. But at the time, this particular epidemic, it's problematic to be collecting the names of these people.
Very.
Because at the time, there were very few, there were kind of very few ways you got it.
Mm-hmm.
One was unprotected sex, one was needle sharing, and then one was blood transfusions.
Mm-hmm.
And those were like the top 3 ways you got it.
Hmm.
So, unfortunately, Dr. Myers was eventually the person in the position.
Okay.
Do you know who Larry Kramer is?
That name sounds familiar. Is he a lawyer?
No, he was a really famous AIDS activist.
Okay.
He was the founder of ACT UP, which was a really famous AIDS protest group that still exists today.
Okay.
And he also wrote Angels in America.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
He was a gay man and he had AIDS. And at the time of this appointment of this doctor, this is what he said about Mathilde. I think she is exceptionally naive politically. I think we learned that last week. We are all very angry with her, so far as one can get angry with Mathilde, because we love her so. She screwed up totally, and that 10th-rate commissioner is there because of her. I appreciated that sentiment was both kind and cutting.
Yeah. Because the people that you do care about will fuck up. And you can call them on that and still love them.
And she said in the same article, she said that the criticism really hurt her.
It should.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if she ever understood entirely why they said, why they were as upset with her as they were. So most people,
that was
though,
really wrong.
Yeah,
very.
Most people in the AIDS world at the time did forgive her because she had given and continued to give basically her entire life over to AIDS treatment and research. Between 1985 and 1990 alone, AMFAR, under her direction, awarded $22 million to 340 teams of scientists and researchers.
Wow.
Dr. Krim served as the chair of the AMFAR board until 2007. The National Institute of Health states that during this time that she was chair, from 85 to 2007, AMFAR funded more than 2,200 biomedical, social, behavioral, policy, education, and international projects, which resulted in the development of antiretroviral therapy, prevention of mother-to-child transmission, DNA vaccines, community-based clinical trials, and an international observational database.
Wow.
Her work also resulted in the NIH Revitalization Act of 1993 and the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, which helped low-income folks get HIV treatment. She also published more than 60 scientific papers.
60?
Yeah. And that's like, when I went back and reread that quote where she was like, I could have done more if I hadn't, blah, blah, blah. I was like, girl, what else did you want to do? But I think she means I could have done more research. I could have been in the lab every day, all day. So she was also on the boards. This is just a small list. There were a lot more. She served on the boards of the Rockefeller Foundation, the National Biomedical Research Foundation, the Committee of 100 for National Health Insurance,
nice,
the Federation of PFLAG, and the African American Institute. Dr. Krim was also asked to serve on advisory committees for Presidents Lyndon B. Johnson and Jimmy Carter.
Wow.
She fought tirelessly also for civil rights for African Americans, women, and LGBTQ people. She fought for laws to ban discrimination in housing, employment, and medical care for LGBTQ people and people with AIDS. She also helped establish needle exchange programs and promoted sex education and condom use. Dr. Krim received 16 honorary doctorates.
Whoa.
You can give one of those to me. I mean, nobody would notice.
Can I have two?
And in 2000, President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the U.S. She died on January 18th, 2018, in Kings Point, New York, at the age of 91.
2018?
2018.
Wow. What a lifetime.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Corey Johnson, the speaker for the New York City Council, is an HIV-positive gay man, and this is what he said about Dr. Mathilde Krim after her passing. She has likely literally saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives because of what she did during the initial days and years of the epidemic. Every single one of us living with HIV today who are on medicines where now we can live and thrive it's because of people like Dr. Mathilde Krim. I want to leave you with Dr. Krim herself, talking about the work she did and the impact it had on the world.
Right things. We tend also to speak about data, about information on the epidemiology, the spread of the disease and who gets in it, who doesn't. Always counting the bad situations. We count the people who are sick or who are this or that. We don't count because we can't count all the lives we have saved already. And the public should know that there have been millions of people who have not become infected or have not died of AIDS because of what we have done in terms of prevention or treatment.
That's right.
And that it is, in fact, very encouraging.
It is very encouraging.
It is, yeah.
You can't count the people that have never gotten it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't count the people who are now living fully free, amazing lives because of the work that she did.
Mm-hmm.
I personally just found her to be really profoundly captivating and just so dedicated to something that, again, she never needed to be dedicated to.
Mm-hmm.
She personally was probably never going to come in contact with it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's always a testament to someone who goes out of their way to do something that doesn't affect them, but prevents other people or helps other people from misery.
Mm-hmm.
And today we have PrEP, which is an incredible drug that helps prevent the getting HIV.
Yeah.
And right now the big fight, and ACT UP is currently on this fight, is trying to prevent PrEP from becoming financially unavailable to people. It used to be much cheaper, and now that it's like a marketable drug.
Yes, it's
the price of it has gone through the roof.
Yeah,
so that's what ACT UP is currently working on.
You had given a link to a quick little 30-minute podcast or something about the HIV drug hike of PrEP and things like that. I think you put it on your Facebook and said, take a quick listen. I listened to it twice.
Yeah.
It was really good. It was a while ago.
It was an episode of The Daily.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, and it was the guy from ACT UP was the one talking about it.
Okay. Yeah.
So I used quite a few sources.
I would imagine.
The video that I used that you heard those clips from is this incredible series of videos from 2007 I think 2007 to 2011 called In the Life, ITL Media. They were documentary stories from the gay experience. And I was like, that should still exist. Why don't we have that still? I also used the New York Times quite a bit. I used an article from 1984 called Dr. Mathilde Krim, focusing on attention on AIDS research by Judy Klemzerud. And from 1990, Deirdre Carmody wrote Painful Political Lessons for the AIDS Crusader and her obit from the New York Times. I used Amfar's profile and obit and a really great, very long, intensive profile on the Jewish Women's Archive by Ruth Schwartz Cohen. And then I also used the National Institutes of Health, which I quoted quite a bit. I couldn't paraphrase. I was like, this is a lot of information. I need to just go ahead and quote. And there were two women scientists who wrote about her, Marcella Flores and Rowena Johnston. And I used a Lancet profile and NPR's All Things Considered.
Very nice. That is a lot of sources.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
But I wanted to be really thorough. And because she was a New York New York City citizen, there was a lot of New York Times stuff on her.
What a wonderful work. I had watched a documentary that was featured on PBS about the epidemic when it hit the Castro in San Francisco. And it, stories of all these people who had lost their lives. And this one guy had survived it and just talking about how he just watched all of his friends, all of his boyfriends, just all of his ex-boyfriends, their boyfriends, just people dying all around them. And just the tragedy that it still is.
It still is. And now it's I think the number one most affected group is Black women.
Really?
At the moment. And it's, I think there's this idea that AIDS went away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I feel like
It was a thing that was over there.
Yeah, it's a thing we don't talk about as much, but it's still out there and still affecting millions and millions of people, particularly on the continent of Africa. That's, in fact, AMFAR, her foundation, that's their primary work now, is working to stop the spread and combat it on the continent of Africa. So, you know, I think it's really important that we consider that it wasn't that long ago. It's not gone away.
No.
And we still need to treat it.
Yeah.
And there's no cure yet. Let's still find the cure.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I like that one.
It was a good episode, I think.
This was a good one. I liked
it. Air high five. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you to our editor, Lucas.
Thank you, Lucas.
And also to Jennifer Finch of L7.
I also want to thank some people out there. We've been hustling for some Inlander Best of votes for best podcast here in Spokane, and we've gotten a lot of response from people. So just want to say thank you for the love.
We've also been getting some more quality interactions on social media with some of our listeners, and I want to keep encouraging that because it's really cool.
It makes our day.
It just makes you feel like, oh, they really are listening. It's like how I feel as a teacher. Oh, they really are listening. But for real, I just appreciate everybody who's listening. And please, if you live in the Spokane area, just open up that bestof.inlander.com and vote for us for Best Podcast.
Please do.
We really want
to win.
And we love you for listening.
All right, guys. Till next time.